Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review. I'm Asbed Bedrossian and I'm here with Hovik Manucharyan. We are recording this show on Sunday, January 29, 2023. Here are the major topics we have on our mind today. The last 4 years have seen a very different kind of commemoration of the important national day of Army Day in Armenia. We'll talk about yesterday's events. The EU has approved an expanded civilian monitoring mission to Armenia. We'll talk about what that means and its implications for the entire region. And finally, we'll discuss some of the politics swirling around the Artsakh Blockade. To talk about these issues, we have with us Arthur G. Martirosyan, who is a senior consultant with CM Partners. In 1994, after graduating from Yale University, he joined Conflict Management Group and the Harvard Negotiations Project and has since worked on conflicts in the former Soviet Union, the Middle East, the Balkans, Africa, and Latin America.
Hello, Arthur.
Hi, Arthur.
Hi.
Thanks for coming back.
Thank you.
Awesome. Arthur, so January 28th was Armenia's Army Day, and that was yesterday. First, we'd like to thank all those who served, who are serving, and plan to serve on this important milestone, which is the 31st anniversary of the Armenian Army. A heartfelt thank you to all of our brave soldiers. And the Armenian forces are, I would say the backbone of the hopes of any successful Armenian state. It's elementary, but basically there's no future without a strong army. So with that in mind, I wanted to talk about the day and how it went.
Yeah. So yesterday, that was January 28th, hundreds of parents and relatives of fallen soldiers were forcibly removed from Yerablur by hundreds and by some accounts thousands of Pashinyan's Red Beret police and other guards to allow Pashinyan and ministers to visit the pantheon of fallen soldiers on Army Day. Of course, there was absolutely zero coverage of these events in government-controlled press, such as Armen press, but there were many articles in the more independent or opposition-leaning press, like 168.am. I don't know if you watched some of the events, some of the videos, and I was going to ask you, Hovik, Arthur, any impressions from the day? Hovik?
So yeah, I was under weather yesterday, and I wasn't able to participate, but I should let everyone know on the show that I was there in Yerablur on September 21st, when these parents also attempted to prevent Nikol Pashinyan from what they call desecrating the memory of the soldiers. And I felt the same vibe, essentially. In my opinion, I think January 28th needs to be one of the cornerstone holidays within the logic of what we said, which is that the Armenian army needs to be both morally and, of course, physically, and not just words, ready for any challenge. But I have to note that, this is the third January 28th since 2020 that basically this is being conducted in somber mood. If you remember, January 2021 was right after the war. Many of the ceremonies were canceled. January 22, the government canceled the ceremony because of COVID. This year, 2023, we have to deal with the memory of the horrible incident in Azad village. But I also sort of forced myself to listen to the messaging coming from this government, because counter to what I think would be logical, the messaging seems to be that, at least in Pashinyan's speech, there was a reference to the fact that we cannot deviate from an agenda of peace and the need to consistently push forth on the agenda of so-called peace, even though that peace is like a pipe dream nowadays, and it's almost laughable. And also one of Pashinyan's lieutenants, Sasun Mikhaelian, he's one of the civil contract members and head of the aircraft law organization, said that after Vazgen Sarkisyan, we have not had any army building. And, he said it on live TV. Now, regardless of what you think, and, we can argue whether that's right or wrong, but saying something like that on the day of the army does not seem like the right thing to do, in my opinion. And it sort of, actually has an opposite effect. I wanted to ask Arthur, from the perspective of public communication, from the perspective of ensuring that the Armenian army has a fighting spirit, what good is it to say that, hey, we didn't have an army? Obviously, it's not true, but what good is it to actually underscore that on public TV and public messaging on such an important day?
Well, I think we're giving too much credit to people like Sasun, because he's never thinking about the common good or state interests. His thinking is loyalty to a particular leader, because through that loyalty, he's gaining access to the trial. I can prove it very easily. If he believes what he's saying right now, Why was he a member of the Republican Party of Armenia? Why was he supporting Serge Sarkisyan?
Right.
If he's honest, if he has any sense of integrity, why? Where was he then? And where is he now? The same place where he was then. He was then doing what he's doing now. In other words, he can say anything that would support the regime that he's working for. Second, I think, I don't know if in diaspora still are people who believe that in 2018 they were supporting a democratic revolution, a change to democracy. This week provided yet another evidence that there is no democracy. And a democratic leader doesn't go to the sacred places of the nation under the cover of thousands of policemen. There's something terribly wrong, and visibly terribly wrong, with your image of democracy if that is happening. Mm-hmm. Yes, there can be security detail, but not to make sure that nobody's there while he's visiting. Right? Something is terribly wrong with that. And secondly, obviously you said about the army is the cornerstone. I think for these guys, it's not really important because their vision of peace, army is not going to be necessary. I mean, it's a lunacy, but they believe that once they make the deal with Turks and Azeris, army is not going to be necessary. And the logic, very false logic that they are employing, is that, well, we cannot fight Turks and Azeris. Numerically, they're always going to be stronger than we are. Then the purpose is just to make a peace on their terms, and they will let us live. We will just continue to live on 29,800 square kilometers. That's their.
Well, it's much less than that nowadays. Significantly.
Well, I mean, they keep repeating that, but that's their vision. It's a counter to any state building, but that's the vision that they have been infused by outside players who've been giving them false guarantees that you do that. Make peace with Turks on their terms. That is, take out part of your identity, reformat that, forget about the genocide. Well, keep the genocide as just a memory thing, right? It's no longer the, forget about reparations, forget about, just stick to the reconciliation without any of that stuff. Make peace with Azeris on their terms, give Artsakh to them, and get rid of Russians. And in that case, you will live happily ever after. That's what they believe in. And in that world, in that vision, there is no place for the army. They don't need army. In fact, they don't need any of these state attributes. It will be just the territory where they can prosper and keep the power, authoritarian power, through the security, through the police that they're pumping the money into. That's what's happening. And I'm surprised. I'm really surprised that still in diaspora, you have people who parrot, maybe their egos, parrot the same thing over and over, that Pashinyan came to save this nation. Pashinyan came to power to keep that power and to enjoy everything that comes with that power. And his power is getting absolute. Forget about the republic, forget about the checks and balances. He is the sole person deciding everything in the country. He wants it to be that way, and he's driving it there. And if you haven't understood this game yet, then I'm sorry. I mean, nothing can help this nation reclaim its statehood and even have a hope that we're going to have it.
Yeah, yesterday's events are essentially a show in the aftermath of the terrible events in the military barrack that killed 15 people in Gerarkunik, that the people are still quite demoralized and full of apprehension towards the government and how it is treating the armed forces. It's been additionally demoralizing to know that the government has written off the possibility of any political accountability for this event by Pashinyan's government. Pashinyan has been pushing his own preferred incident narrative, and he conceived that narrative before any investigation was even launched, let alone completed. And so I think I mentioned it a couple of days ago on our show that I think it was Alen Simonian who basically said that there will be no accountability on the part of the defense minister. So he's doing his job just fine. Right. I wanted to basically ask for your thoughts on this terrible event 10 days after it happened. Today is the 29th, of course, and that happened on the 19th. What is the value of political accountability, and why can't we get that from this government?
Well, I think I already alluded to the answer to that question. You can have civilian control over the defense ministry or the military, if you have democracy, if you have separation of powers, and if that separation of powers and checks and balances is working. It's not working that way. When Pashinyan, on the next day in the morning, the investigation hasn't really started yet because they have to fill out lots of paperwork before they even start working on the investigation. He announces his version of what happened, and then the prosecutor general and all their minions parrot the same narrative, right? They say this is what happened. No alternative hypothesis is allowed. No alternative explanation of what happened is allowed. Only what and how he wants to think about it, right? And they're not going to resign. They're going to be covering the truth to the very end as they're in power. They have the means to do that. They can do it, no matter what you say. Although it's obvious to me that someone like Artsakh Manucharyan, when he's lying through his teeth, and contrary to the fact that the unit was located there from May, he was saying on television, on the record, that they were somehow moved there temporarily for the previous couple of weeks. It is a sign that anybody who enters that government will have to tell the lies that Pashinyan wants them to lie to the people. And they can live with that. And the population is going to be condoning that. Why? That is a different story. But that's what we have right now. That's what we have right now.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. On Monday, the EU approved an expanded civilian monitoring mission to the borders of Armenia. The mission was originally announced as 200 monitors and for 2 years, but that number was reduced to 100, at least for now. We should note that these monitors are sent to Armenia near the current line of contact between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So they have nothing to do with the Russian peacekeepers in Artsakh. As Azerbaijan has invaded sovereign Armenian territory, they also claim that none of their forces are on what they consider Armenian territory, and they have not approved the EU monitors to be on the de facto or de jure borders between the two countries. So this is solely between Armenia and the EU. And the Armenian government basically has decided to station the EU monitors actually along the entire length of the Armenian-Azerbaijani border, and according to some news reports, even including the border with Nakhichevan. So this is the second week we're covering this important event, but I think it is necessary to do so. The Armenian government has received these news very enthusiastically. Foreign Minister Martirosyan said that the mission will contribute to peace and stability in the region. So just a little bit of background, since May 2021, Armenia has asked the CSTO essentially to giving a political assessment of Azerbaijani behavior. Essentially, they want the CSTO to announce that Azerbaijan is violating Armenia's sovereign territory, but the CS has steadfastly refused to get involved. So the offer of sending CSTO monitors to Armenia was also rejected by Armenia on those grounds back in December, that the CSTO would not identify Azerbaijan as an aggressor country. Some individual EU countries, on the other hand, I think France, have called Azerbaijan an aggressor, but I don't know if there is a single voice that speaks for EU that has done that. So my question to begin with is, are the official grounds for rejecting the CSTO monitoring mission legitimate or sufficient reason for a political row between Armenia and Russia, including the CSTO?
I think CSTO can be criticized for that if you go formally by the letter of the agreement, right, of the charter of CSTO. They can be criticized very severely for not condemning the aggression by Azerbaijan. By condemning the aggression and even using the aggression, the term aggression, implies that you have to take measures against that aggression. And measures is not just condemning it, reporting about it. It's about sanctions, or even worse, a military response to that aggression. Now, for obvious reasons, Russians couldn't do that. I mean, I'm not going to even go into that. I mean, everybody understands how much is at stake for them in Ukraine and why they have these interests with Azerbaijan and Turkey. And Turkey-Azerbaijan, the tandem, uses them very, very efficiently, by the way. When it comes to the alternative, now, yes, we have European observers, monitors. I don't know how long they're going to be stationed, 2 years. I mean, they're talking about 2 years. But let me ask this question. Did the European Union even if there was a condemnation in the resolutions in the European Parliament, and Azerbaijan was called aggressor, did they take any action? I'm not going to mollify the importance of having any observers in terms of a deterring factor. So in some ways, it's a deterring factor for Azerbaijan and Turkey to try to do a blitzkrieg and cut off Sunni from the rest of the country and put their corridor by force. It is a deterring factor, but how seriously is it a deterring factor? I mean, that's a question in my mind. The powers that be, and our diplomat number one, believes that that's the solution. I have many stories for him from the history of international relations to disappoint him if he shares that illusion that that's the solution. Because if Azerbaijan and Turkey find the opportunity, just any opening for doing what they want to do by force, they will do it by force. And no monitors will be able to do anything with that, because if the interests of the European powers, of Americans in Turkey and Azerbaijan is bigger than all the declarations and values, the observers will just step aside, as we have seen happen in so many cases. When UN observers, UN peacekeepers have been brushed aside by the power that had decided that it could do it by force and could live with that.
Well, they are, in fact, observers. They're not supposed to do anything except observe and report.
Right. So they might observe how Turks and Azeris build their corridor, whatever they call it. And then they will condemn it. Yes, there will be condemnation. And there will be huge concern. And Blinken will be telling the entire world that he just had a conversation with Aliyev and Erdogan and expressed concern. But both Erdogan and Aliyev know that his public concerns are nothing but words. We need action. If you really want to deter the war, show that the aggressor is punished by means that are available to you. I'm not saying that European Union, which doesn't have a military force, needs to punish Azerbaijan by engaging militarily. No, of course it's not. The other important piece here is the bigger game. The bigger game is the West, in existential confrontation now with Russia, is attempting to push out Russia from the region as much as and as fast as possible, because there is Iran and other issues that talk less, and now probably talk too much, but they would talk less. Okay, so they have those interests, and they want that to be done by getting Armenia and Armenians do that. So take the base out, get the Russians out, and once that happens, Armenia is going to find itself with only protectors who are talking about that protection. And Armenia is going to be deprived of the protector who, out of its own interest, can be still protecting, doing some protection. I'm not saying overall. So that's the dilemma. That's the challenge, you know. And as I look at this game is also about driving Russians out and having Russians now see this as a very anti-Russian move. So if Russia, your protector right now, is at war with the West, and European Union is part of that war, you are engaging their adversaries, and they're saying, okay, do that, and we'll see if you're going to like the consequences of what you're doing. They are now almost openly threatening with those consequences. We don't know what those consequences are going to be, but if we have learned any lessons from our own history, we don't want to go back in 1920.
Yes.
And see Armenia shrink even more, because Russians would not care less if it's going to be just the capital of Yerevan, as long as they have their interests protected. And they will do everything that their interests are protected at our expense, through the mistakes, through the huge errors of the Armenian powers that be. And yes, we can then, 100 years, blame Russians, Turks, and everybody else for what happened. But I'm saying now is the time to ask the same question. What have we done or haven't done that has made this possible? Because if we cannot influence our own, how the hell are we hoping to influence Russians or anybody else?
Yeah.
Right? If we cannot put our own house in order, then obviously all other players in the anarchic international relations, and particularly now when there is no enforcement, right? Forget about UN enforcing any resolutions, OSCE enforcing any resolution, and so forth. It's about power and power balance. In that world that we are right now, playing this kind of a game with Russians is going to be costly.
Arthur, you mentioned the desire of the West and the EU in sending these monitors. Are they one and the same? For instance, various EU leaders have actually bluntly told Armenia, including most recently the French National Assembly leader, that the EU cannot provide a security umbrella for Armenia, essentially, almost those same words.
Right.
If, as you say, that this mission carries the risk of alienating Russia's strategic ally, the one who has an agreement with Armenia, the one who has boots on the ground, is nuclear armed, then are the Armenian authorities thinking clearly about the next steps? I think you sort of answered this, but is it possible that Armenia could end up in a situation in which it gets the worst of both worlds? No nuclear umbrella, no Russian base, and no external power, other than Turkey, of course, which would be willing to commit to forces in Armenia. And in the case of Turkey, maybe not entirely, out of the interests of Armenia itself.
Well, in a different geography, in a different situation, could have been. The alternatives game that they are playing, right? It's not like negotiators don't know it or would not even recommend it under certain circumstances to play. But when you have a confrontation between your alternative security dilemma solvers, right? The West and Russia, by engaging in the alternatives game and shopping around, you are inviting them to your own territory to use it as a playground for their competition. And part of the problem is obviously tied to the uncertainty on how the Russia-Ukraine war is going to be resolved, what the shape of world order is going to be post that war, relations of Russia with the West, and so forth. And if you believe that the West has won or is winning, and there are so many voices in the Armenian government and around it who believe that, then obviously you think that you are jumping off a sinking Titanic. Okay, so Russia is sinking Titanic, and you're jumping into the water because there is a safe boat, and you hoping to reach the safe boat. The problem with this is that the Russian Titanic may be not so much a Titanic as an icebreaker, because you miscalculated. You didn't realize where you are. I mean, are you on a Titanic or on an icebreaker? I don't know how the war is going to end, but that's also possible. And number two, in a game like this, why are you rushing? Why do you want to take sides and be on one of the sides when there is so much uncertainty around you? You either are getting directions from elsewhere to do that, right? I mean, logically, or you came to power with that agenda. You came to power with that agenda, and now you see the opportunity to implement it. So, in other words, we may find ourselves in a situation when we were running after two hares, chasing two hares, and we got none. And we are left with the wolves on our own. And the wolves are sitting there and waiting. Nothing makes them happier right now in Baku than what is happening, because it was their dream to have Russia alienated from Armenia. For 25 years, their diplomacy, their propaganda, all the money they were pumping into that had one single message to Moscow: don't trust Armenia. Armenians are going to jump off to the next player immediately. And in the Russian psyche, they have some traumatic experiences with that. I mean, yes, they're imperialists, nationalists, call them whatever. I don't care about that. I care how they think right now. And how they think right now, they've seen Bulgaria, which was saved. I mean, in their at least narrative, right? Historical. And there is some truth to it. 1878, they saved hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers in Plevna, in Shipka, and they saved Bulgaria from the Ottomans. What was the thank you from Bulgaria? Bulgaria in the First World War joined the anti-Russia coalition. In the Second World War, again in the anti-Russian coalition. And right now, again in anti-Russian coalition. So their thinking is there are this, they call them limitrophs, right? A small state that either has to stay loyal to our national interests and security foremost, or we can put them in the unrepairable adversaries, like the Baltic states, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Or we have countries like Armenia, Georgia, and others who right now are more pro-Western probably, but we can punish them and we can show them that their only way to save their countries is with us. And that's what prevails in their mindset right now. And they're playing into that mindset. The Armenian government and the Armenian leaders today, they play into the hands of Ankara and Baku. This is their plan, and they're implementing it. It also works in the interest of the West because, again, it's about kicking Russians out of the region.
Arthur, we're talking about Russia here. They've been vehemently negative about the EU monitoring mission. The latest statements have come very clearly. They are pretty furious and pissed off. The language is still diplomatic, but clearly Russia does not like this. Why are they so upset about it? What do they stand to lose with this mission in Armenia?
I don't think the emotional outburst is really about something to lose. It's about their ire. It can be explained by that notion of sensing betrayal, sort of. I gave you the example of Bulgaria, but there can be other examples too. Okay, yeah. So it's almost like saying "Et tu, brute," right? And you too, brute, right? You're doing this when we are at our most sensitive point, when we are in a terrible existential fight, not just Ukraine, but the West. You are turning against us because you believe that it's in your interest, although we were proposing you something that would probably serve your interest better. And it's all because you think that our game with Turks and Azeris is totally unacceptable for you. Whereas that's also in our existential bucket, right? I mean, we need that right now. So it's almost a conversation of a deaf person with someone who cannot really articulate issues with anything other than emotions right now. Primarily, it's not a threat to their interests, but they can see that it's a kind of this encroachment, right? I mean, we first bring the European observers, then we invite NATO, then we do this. So obviously, they're thinking in those terms. The question is, does the Armenian government, Armenia, that has its head in the mouth of the wolf, worth playing that kind of a game with a bear?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say no. I would say no, because your goal in diplomacy is not the protest, is not the démarches and, all sorts of rhetorical exclamations. Your goal in diplomacy is getting what you need from the others. Others need to do that, not say, but do that. And unfortunately, because the Armenian public has, that's the political culture post-Soviet. They think that diplomacy is that. We showed them their place. See how tough was our rhetoric with them. That's not diplomacy, I'm sorry.
Arthur, in the same statements that they've been making comments about the EU monitoring mission, they've also been mentioning the peacekeepers stationed in Artsakh and also in some places around the borders of Armenia. Do you think they are hinting that they might withdraw the peacekeepers? And do you think that this might have something to do with the punishing that you mentioned a little bit earlier?
No, I think they can punish without doing that. They're already doing that. They're punishing without doing that. The Russian miscalculation is that they think that what is happening in Lachin, or Berzor, more proper Armenian name, Berzor Corridor, is somehow putting pressure on Pashinyan. And I'd say no. He has washed his hands.
Right.
You can crucify Artsakh now. It's fine with them. No pressure on them at all. But Russian thinking was that, okay, here's what we're going to do. If Azeris are going to close the road, we will say that we cannot by force remove the ecologists or civilians, and therefore this will continue, and it will have a very negative impact on Pashinyan. No, of course not. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. And that's obvious to me. And therefore, the Russians miscalculated. But they're thinking, again, I mean, it's not, they're not going to, Russians, again, a lot depends on how things evolve around Ukraine, how long it's going to take how it's going to end, right? Too many unknowns there.
Right.
And obviously, some of the answers to that question may be quite different from what I'm suggesting right now. Because Russians may be forced to remove everything from the Southern Caucasus if they lose their war in Ukraine.
Right.
Possible and probable scenario. And yet, I think it's more likely that they're going to cling to whatever they have. They have shown historically that tenacity. Armenians may start hating them, cursing them, doing whatever, but they will continue to do what's in their interest. And if military presence is going to be in their interest, I assure you that they will find a way to continue their presence, despite what Yerevan is going to be saying. As to how it's going to all end, obviously I do not have a crystal ball. I cannot tell you how it's going to end. I'm just telling you what we see. And as analysts, I'm just looking at how the sides are negotiating, even when they are not at the table, by the way, because negotiation is not, as a concept, limited to only what's happening at the table when diplomats or business people talk. So we can analyze that and we can see what's happening, what are they doing and why they're doing that.
Arthur, let's also touch briefly on the other major interest in the region, Iran, which also in the past has put out veiled statements about foreign forces in the region, but it's been less confrontational than Russia. But it also has said that it will not agree to any geopolitical changes. And this is also timely because yesterday there were a series of explosions which appear like a special military operation by Israel in Iran. So things may be heating up over there. And also, in the long term, EU seems to be being more antagonistic towards Iran for its supply of weapons to Russia, or at least the accusation of that, by imposing sanctions. How critical would the EU monitors in Armenia be for Iran? Would they be tolerable? Is this something that they can swallow, or would we have a problem with Iran as well?
Look, I'm not an Iranologist, and I cannot tell you, even if I were, I wouldn't be able to tell you how the Ayatollahs think about it. We only can take some of their public statements, and as I said, I'm not an Iranologist to know all their public statements. But from what we've seen, it's obvious that they see that as a threat, and they understand what's happening, even without the EU monitors. They understand that once Russia is cut off from the area adjacent to them, the West is going to go. What we saw the other day, by the way, people started to talk about the war, how it was done. Was it done by Israel? There is still a lot of deniability that Israel can use, right? We don't know whose drones were these. The drones, in fact, may not have even any marking on them. I wouldn't rule that out, because the modern hybrid warfare, anything is possible. So you produce drones specifically without any marking, and specifically so that it cannot be identified as Israel. So there's a lot of deniability that you are built in an operation like that. What's Iranian response is going to be to that, I have no idea. But as with the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, there will be a response. When? I don't know. I cannot talk for Iranians. That the move done by the Armenian side is going to have impact on the Armenian-Iranian relations, for sure. Iranians are not new to diplomacy. They have an entire gamut of instruments and tools where they can always remind Armenian powers that be that they are not happy with that move. How sensitive those instruments will be, it's the choice of the Iranian foreign policy. And today I woke up to find out that there are so many experts on Iran residing in Yerevan, right? So everybody now knows what Ayatollahs want and how they're going to go about it. And I'm saying we need to be more modest in our projection of things. One thing that is obvious to me is that it's not in the interests of Iran. And if something is not in the interests of a player like Iran, and they have the instruments and the power, they will make it known to you. How? When? It's a matter of their diplomatic choices. It may not be immediately. It may not be even through some declaration. We may not even see immediately what was done. That's their diplomatic history and style.
So here we are on the 49th day of the Artsakh Blockade. And it looks like it may take a long time, a lot longer than any of us thought. Last weekend, we saw Ruben Vartanian's interview on BBC Hard Talk, and he was clear as a whistle. Nobody's giving up. Nobody's going anywhere. He and the Armenians of Artsakh are at home. Basically, that's what he said. Arthur, given the current situation, what should Armenia and Armenians do to weather the storm?
Well, I think it's not just Armenians, but it's very human to be strong with the hindsight, right?
Yeah.
For 2 years now, I've been warning of these kinds of scenarios. The logic was this. I mean, it's not difficult. It's a very simple syllogism. If you recognize Artsakh as Azerbaijani territory, and you have, although not in an agreement yet, you have done that. If you do that, the question was, what would hinder Azerbaijan from saying, what is your money drum doing on my territory? What are your soldiers? And that the first one was soldiers. They raised that issue, and I think they managed to solve that problem. So Armenians are not serving. Armenians from Hayastan are not serving in Artsakh armed forces. Mm-hmm. What are your documents doing on my territory? What are your banks operating here doing on my territory? And this is my territory. I can do whatever I want. And a year ago, I was warning of this scenario that they might, when they started to build the new road, the alternative, that they might build this road as a kind of a bargaining chip, a quid pro quo, right? I'm giving you this corridor, you give me another corridor. And if you do not agree to that, see what I'm going to do with the corridor that you still are enjoying. So a year ago, what Armenians needed to do that a year ago, prepare for that scenario. So send thousands of generators to Yerevan. Solve the problem of internet with Skylink. How do you solve it? There are solutions to that. Do more to have the food security and other issues stored. Maybe some of it was done. I'm not the one to make a judgment. If Ruben is so confident that we can take this for as long as necessary, I don't know where it's going to end. But I know that the weak condemnations, concerns are not going to push Aliyev to make that decision. And in fact, the more public pressure on him, the more he's likely to say, no, I'm not doing it. Mm-hmm. This is going to continue. So what can we do to, we in diaspora are one thing, Armenians in Armenia is another thing, Artsakh, although three different parts, but I still believe it's one nation.
Right.
So Armenians in diaspora are already doing and can probably do more to put pressure on Europeans to walk the talk. If the European Parliament adopts a resolution that has very tough language on Azeri actions, then why the European Commission views autocratic, corrupt regime of Aliyev as a strategic, reliable partner. So there is a huge gap, right, between what they are saying and what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And I think the diaspora, if it were united, could do even more than it's doing. Even one simple example, right? We have a tennis player who is not even, I think,
Karen Khachanov.
Armenian father. Yeah, he's doing something, right? He takes an action. He takes an action that has more importance in the public communication than many other things. I don't know how many people watched that Hard Talk, because the British viewers, my friends, for instance, they view the Hard Talk when someone who is interesting for them is talking. It's not like, they all sit and wait, and any Hard Talk is in their interest. Mm-hmm. And I even have an assumption that more Armenians worldwide watched it, and Azeris in the Baku president's palace watched it than the Brits or Europeans. So let's not exaggerate all of that. But I think there are many actions that can be done, right? In collaboration between Artsakh, and I'm not going to go and give everything out, but there are possible things to do. Why it's not happening? Because we are divided. Because we have government in Armenia that has taken a whole different line on this issue. And that line is being used against us, as it was by this journalist from Hard Talk, Sakur, right? He was saying, but your government is saying this, but Armenia is saying this. It's a very crafty way of using our divided the state by a country that has a long imperial history of dividing and ruling.
Of dividing and conquering, absolutely. Speaking of
Right.
those divisions, on Wednesday, Pashinyan warned Artsakh's leadership again. We're assuming the target was Ruben Vartanyan, that they should not do anything to undermine Pashinyan's agenda of peace. Of course, Pashinyan's peace is selling the Armenians of Artsakh down the river with very questionable and temporary expectations in return. What is Artsakh's government doing or saying that is causing Pashinyan any concern for a warning like that?
I think Pashinyan would like to see the Artsakh government enter some kind of a dialogue with Baku, accept whatever Baku is demanding right now, and move on. And Pashinyan sees Ruben Vartanyan as an obstacle to this.
Mhm.
Interestingly, Baku sees him as an obstacle, and Pashinyan sees him as an obstacle for different reasons, but they see him as an obstacle. Why Pashinyan would want that? Because that would be exactly his so-called peace agenda.
Vartanyan has said that he is ready for negotiations, but as
But
equal
Baku
partners.
from the very start said they're not going to negotiate with him.
Right.
With all due respect to Ruben Vartanyan, but as a negotiation specialist, I can tell you that one of the most important things that any negotiator has to solve before even he sits at the table is the problem of the legitimacy of entry. I mean, we call it legitimacy of entry. Why the other side should talk to you? Why the other side should talk to me? I mean, have I done something to impress the other side that it's in its own interest to talk to me? Why should they talk to me if they can not to? Again, I mean, he made his choice. We all have to stand by that choice, because if we join now the chorus with Pashinyan against and his government and their supporters, kind of blaming Ruben for this or whatever, we're going to be just playing into the hands of Azeris and Turks. I think we need to stand by him. The question is, what pressure is possible really to bring on Azerbaijan so that he opens that road, and not just opens it to close it again in a month under a different pretext. No, open it permanently. Is it possible? It's a very difficult proposition. I wouldn't say impossible, but it's a very difficult proposition, because we would need to work with the governments, that is the US and EU, that have important interests in Azerbaijan. And that's not just the oil and gas. Much of it, by the way, is going to be Russian. It's Iran, it's Israel's interest, and the role Azerbaijan can play in their plans about Iran. And their plans about Iran are not so much about attacks by drones or direct military confrontation. No, their plans are related to the ethnic minorities. So it will be the Arab-populated southern region of Khuzestan. There will be the Balochistan, you name it, and Kurds maybe. And why not? We have this card of northern, southern Azerbaijan with the most sizable ethnic minority of Iran. So that card is going to be played. So if they're thinking that way, right, why would they want to make things difficult with corrupt, autocratic Aliyev's regime? No, they want to keep him our son of a bitch, but we have to keep him so that he doesn't switch to Russians entirely.
Right. All right. Let's wrap up our topics here. And I'd like to ask each of you if there's something on your mind this past week that you would like to talk about. Are there any topics that have been on your mind?
Well, we discussed most of the topics on my mind. The biggest topic is obviously the suffering and the plight of our Armenian brethren and sisters in Artsakh. You know, and I think it's a particular torment when you are far away. I'm going to be back in the region mid-March, but until then, you're kind of from far away observing how this suffering is inflicted, and you are tormented by your almost impotence to do anything. So
Right.
my thinking is still around those issues. If Armenian government has washed its hands, what is it that the diasporans can do to unite around this issue and to really strategize how, where they're going to find some points of pressure on Aliyev so that he changes his policy, at least for some time, at least to give some breathing space to Artsakh Armenians. And I think it may not be just in Europe and in the US, it may be also in Russia that more important work needs to be done through the Russian Armenians to bring this issue to, if not to the forefront, because for them, Ukraine is number one issue every day except the weekends, all right? Get them to start thinking about what are the implications of all of this, all right? You want to punish Pashinyan, but if you are doing it through the suffering of Armenians in Artsakh, you are alienating yourself for a long time to come from all Armenians.
Right.
And it's time to think about your long-term interests and how this nation could still be a partner with you against now encroachments from the South when the West agenda is over. So my thinking is just about, what needs to be done here. But people, especially the intellectuals, and I don't blame them, in 2018 when they supported Pashinyan, if they see now where he brought the nation, what happened, I want them to find the golden bridge to cross over and to say, now we're setting all our differences aside. Now is the time to think about what I, Serge Tankian, can do for Artsakh Armenians.
Okay. Yeah, those are very important points about Russia and the long term. Thank you. Hovik, what's on your mind?
I think I'm just going to add to our guest's call. And many times we fall into the trap of apathy, like we declare that today is day 49. It may be that one day is going to be day 168 or something like that. And it's very important to remain vigilant and to keep the fire burning, to not resign to this situation being either permanent and also not accepted. So if you are a media personality, if you're a social media influencer, then it behooves upon you to remain indignant about the situation and do more and continue doing what you're doing and not sort of give up, because it's very easy to do. Yeah, that's all I can say. I mean, it's easy to say, this is too much for me, I'm going to sign out. But unfortunately, the people in Artsakh don't have that choice today.
All right. Thank you. We're going to leave it there for today. Thank you, Arthur, for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you, Arthur.
Talk to you soon.
Take care.
That's our show this week. We hope you found it informative. Now go find us on social media and follow us. We'll talk to you next week.